Welcome everybody to another edition of Amplify Your Business. Today we're down here at RUNWITHIT Synthetics. And so this is an exciting AI company. And joining me today is the co-founder and CEO, Myrna Bittner. Welcome to the show, Myrna.
Thank you so much, Lance.
I am just absolutely fascinated with your company because some of the earlier conversations that we've had about it, it's just you're at the crossroads of setting or helping governments and businesses set policy that really impacts so many people. And I think it's really cool the technology that you're using to create these synthetic populations. And you mentioned you can actually survey people within the synthetic population that you've created. And so instead of me trying to explain it, why don't you explain a little bit about the business and how you guys go about doing all these really cool things?
We started out thinking that we weren't very good at reality, and we were a digital technologies company at the beginning and helping people build systems around their digital systems. And so that we could dial forward and they could see how those systems would respond or react in the future. And as it turns out, around the edges of those digital systems was, reality. It was people, it was the climate, it was the environment, it was connected systems. It was roadways, it was, people wearing devices, people driving devices. And so the realities that we began to assemble and create gradually we built up this capacity, and we had our first ask in 2019 to build a city.
Okay.
And it was a city, and they wanted to look at people, and they wanted to look at technologies, and they wanted us to create a disaster and understand the opportunities in there that they were missing.
Yeah.
Missing about resilience and missing about how they could connect technologies and policy to human impact and time to return to normal, which I think is really what excited us and what changed our trajectory as a company and brought us to where we are today, which is firmly creating cities around the world so we can find out, what people are going to experience and how to make sure that's better.
So now when you say creating a city, explain to us a little bit about what you actually mean by that, because I think our viewers today might not quite understand a synthetic city and how you go about developing that.
Right. So there's a few aspects to it. One is deep tech, technology. So being able to look at all of the actors in a city and dynamic parts of a city and actually generate digital bodies, AI-based entities that react, respond, learn, make choices. I'm going to ride my bike today. It's raining. I'm going to take the bus. Those kinds of things. So we take the population and we make a synthetic population. Then there are things that act in that population. So there are traffic lights, or there is weather, or connected systems and devices, and we make that layer of entities. These are all, deep tech programmed, lot of little, white text on screens flashing by. But then we also have a whole visualization layer. So, and different ways of visualizing that. So people can see the entities that are people in a city, and they can understand and have access to that kind of data in a very visual way. And that's where you get like the SimCity, type interface. So people can actually not just see graphs and charts and, relate to futures, from a data perspective, but they can actually see their own city. And we think that that's part of what makes it so compelling is you can't unsee your own city. And it's not just speculation about things like climate change or a disaster that might happen, or the difference between urban, sprawl and density. You can actually see it and understand far easier. It makes it more accessible.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And so you're using machine learning and AI to populate all of this and then have them go through different scenarios then that you would present. So for instance, if you were to build a synthetic Edmonton, then one of the potential crises or situations might be a power outage that lasts, I think you'd mentioned this to me, lasts like for 3 days or something. At what point is it that people go out and buy generators, right? And so you can poll the population and try to understand, well, the different segments of the population, the different populations within our city, the people who have different are living in different scenarios. So you maybe have a homeless population, maybe you have an elderly population, maybe you have, women versus men and single versus married and everything else. You can program all that in and then run the scenario and find out how each individual would or population would act then.
Yeah, and it is like you say, different because we do include what we call psychographics, which is that part about how people think or feel, that things that they've experienced, maybe complex intersectionality or medical, kind of characteristics, as well as, your typical standard statistics like, income and age and education level and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And we can bring those two worlds together. And then, yes, like you say, we can actually ask our synthetics anything that we want. Yeah. Because they're a purely synthesized population. They'll tell us, whatever we want. So we can ask them about their experience during an outage. And one of the particular scenarios we did was for a utility in the U.S., and they were concerned about the vulnerability of different populations during that outage. In Phoenix, it's hot, so they have compounding factors, and they have a lot of elderly people. And so they're looking for, how many people would have caregivers or wouldn't, or, would need to know if they needed to move in 3 hours or not. And so all of the different kind of mechanisms that are in operation and how the synthetics in those houses and in those apartments were feeling throughout the outage was really important to them.
Yeah, which is really interesting, right? Like dialing into the way people would be feeling even. Like that's remarkable. And especially like I can see the applications as, somebody who's in marketing and advertising, just for companies to try to figure out what that might mean in terms of the supply, the demand that they might have on their services or their products or whatever, and all these different types of scenarios that you could model out. Whether, and I can see people down on the coast of Florida where, a hurricane comes in. Okay, let's model this out. What impact does this have on building supply? What does it have on, energy and everybody else, right? The grid and stuff too. So it's really interesting. But I love the aspect of like the vulnerable populations, layering that into it too. And so I'd imagine policymakers, governments must be really excited about what you guys can create.
Yes, and this is, I think, just becoming, part of our lexicon now in terms of North America. Yeah. So, understanding what it means to have access to hard to count populations or invisible populations, and really becoming aware of what those groups, how those groups are constituted and what it means to them, the impact of different policies and programs. Yeah. We're even looking at now mental health and addictions, because that is becoming so visible and an epidemic, that we can't ignore any longer in cities. So, and that ranges, of course, not only in vulnerable populations, but across, demographics and age as well. Yeah. So, so those kinds of things, yes, are becoming really interesting questions that we love to become a part of answering. Yeah. So has our mayor had you working yet on, tackling homelessness? Yeah, I'd imagine that's got to be one of the things that is on the radar here. I have not met our existing mayor yet, but I look forward to it. Yeah. We are working and active in the Edmonton region, though. So, yeah, most definitely. Yeah, and just on that note, I mean, you're working with people, businesses, and governments all over the world. Asia, Europe. All across North America and to the States and stuff, right? So some exciting projects. Yeah. Yeah. That's really cool. I think the technologies is wonderful. Now, what I'm curious though is how did you end up here, as a CEO, co-founder of this company? So do you have a background in tech? Do you have a background in policy? Like where does that come from that got you to this place here? I always you can cherry pick your background so that it shows how you ended up here in a straight line, but it wasn't a straight line. So I had a degree in English and sociology, which made me very intensely curious about communications. I did an MBA program and created my first tech company halfway through my MBA. Okay. And that was, the internet was a year old, and I thought it just gave a profound opportunity to solve many communication problems. So we had a remote issue resolution, brainstorming, live video conferencing, audio conferencing. We were like one pandemic away from becoming really popular. But we sold to some really interesting organizations and moved on then into a neural net and 3D visualization company in the 90s. So, and that really formed the foundation of what we're doing today. So understanding the application of artificial intelligence, being able to use artificial intelligence on a massive scale with really limited hardware, because that's, the foundations of the 90s. We didn't have supercomputers, so we couldn't just, get, kind of, what do they call it, fat and sassy, and do, really large things that now, computing power gives you access to. We had to be really lean and operate on, but it gave us a super scalar capacity that we're using today.
Yeah, really
then
cool.
I grew some people, some kids in the middle, and did some consulting, and then ended up here.
Yeah. So not synthetic kids, actually, real live,
real
kids.
People.
And so it was definitely through technology. Then after your MBA, then it sounds like that you started to build these companies, and then just kept on. Sort of trading up almost, so to speak, right?
And looking for problems. Looking for problems big problems, are always the biggest opportunities. So looking for big problems to solve.
Well, and I think that's really interesting too, right? Because there's a lot of, like, us entrepreneurs, we're always trying to tackle, what issues maybe are out there, because that's where the opportunity lies, right? It usually starts with a need that we've seen ourselves oftentimes, but that tends to be maybe not the big, problems of the world, right, that are being solved. And so you have a much more global perspective, a much larger perspective that you're trying to solve with some really massive things. Does that come just out of the curiosity and the sociology background and all that? Or is that come from someplace else? What cultivated that, I guess, within you?
I think that it does come from a bit from sociology and people. And also being in technology for so many years, seeing how they were absent. So there was, there's a ton of engineering work, there's a ton of engineering simulation, there's a ton of, but it's like the people are like the afterthought that show up at the end, and we realize that the world isn't designed for them, or the buildings aren't designed for them, and maybe they're not designed for sustainability either, which is kind of important to people.
Kind of.
So that part, I think, was what was the really aha moment with this last company with Run With It, was seeing how important when we brought the people to those digital systems, even how that changed, and the necessity of that for figuring out the future. You can't just firefight people, like we have been firefighting the planet and firefighting systems. It's better if they're a part of our planning and processing, and if we could use technology to bring them, that would be amazing. So that's where that started. And then resistance, I think, a little bit to, it's got to be simple, there's got to be an app for that. So it's kind of ended us up in a place where we resisted a lot of the trends for venture capital, because they were looking for that children's story, they always say, and the app, that is a SaaS app. So it's got to be fast, got to be a million people, and and we were like, no, there's some things that are really valuable problems to solve. And they're complicated, and they're hard, and they take a while. So we're not a overnight success. This has been 8 years so far. But they're worth it.
So now, give me a little bit of the background then from the growth of this company. Are you venture capital backed? Is this something that you just grew organically? How did that all come together, I guess?
We've grown it organically. So we're revenue funded, and we've kind of hit an interesting doubling cycle now that we are going to be reaching out to some good capital partners, I think. But that, again, being a woman-led and certified Aboriginal business, there isn't a lot of capital out there, so we chose not to be distracted by it either. So instead of spending the first few years becoming the organization that capital wants you to become, and then chasing it, we decided to become profitable and invest. It only had value if we could translate that into what we were eating. And so that's kind of how we pursued this company. But now we've kind of got to the point where we're leaving way too much on the floor. So we're seeking capital to help us grow.
It's a novel idea, I think, in the tech space, to be trying for profitability before actually going to the markets to try to
Yes.
grow.
Yes, it
Yeah,
is.
like it is. Like nowadays, that's just not the way that most people are building their companies, right?
Yes.
And so I really appreciate that, because I think that's grounded in, success, and grounded in this ability to create something that actually has some sustenance there. It's not just a wild idea. It's actually, you're doing this and you're proving that the market wants it and needs it and is
Yes.
willing to pay for it, right?
Yeah.
So I'd imagine, and then you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you've probably already put some fillers out there from the capital markets to find out
Yes.
what the appetite is. You must get really great reception because of the revenue focus that you guys have had to have up until this point.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's good.
Yeah.
It's good. And I'm heading off to Denver in early April to present at the International Growth Forum from the National Renewable Energy Lab. So,
Oh, wow.
yes, one of the few companies that gets to present. So, no,
Yeah.
it's good. And I think it's interesting to be able to, and I try to as much as possible, share this experience with others, because there is this this resounding, and I don't think it's the most diverse message, fail fast.
Yep.
And yet I think there is also an alternative message, which is succeed slowly. And, and so it's not that you can't be a tech entrepreneur without, or have a particular mindset.
Yeah.
You can have many mindsets, and you just have to find your way.
Yeah, and it's growth with intention too, I think is also really key, because I think when you get trapped into this whole need to generate capital, right, you get into this hamster wheel of just trying to do series after series after series to grow to the point where there is the potential for profitability. You just don't grow in the way that maybe you would want to. The intention sometimes is lost there, and so you're just trying to get that top level, and I think some companies can lose sight of really what the goal is, or really what the vision is, right?
Yeah, and a lot of founders, it's not very friendly for founders, and so there's a really large innovation community that kind of sits on top of a very small group of people who take extraordinary risk and chances in starting these companies and putting everything on their company, from their lives and their mortgages and everything, to try and get it going. And that I think should be part of the reward at the end is for those innovators who make it.
Yeah. And you definitely can sleep better, I think, knowing that you have something that's profitable.
Yes.
Because I can't imagine, like, some of them when they're taking out those massive amounts of capital and there's no end in sight in terms of profitability. It's a long ways in the future. That's got to be scary. I just don't work that way. My brain doesn't function that way. But when it comes to lessons that you've learned along the way in your entrepreneurial journey to this point, whether that's within this business or one of your previous businesses, do you have any profound moments of that you're like, you know what? If I wish I would have known that. Some big lessons that you've learned along the way that our audience might be able to benefit from.
Oh, there's so many. I try to not live with regret, because even when we do make mistakes, I think it's just a matter of reframing and going, wow, what did I learn from that? I think the biggest thing for me is to, and it could be just because I'm different, is to listen to the voices of the community, because there is a huge ecosystem out there now to support, especially technology companies, and to listen to those voices, but also to be able to know that there is the opportunity to be something completely different inside of that community as well. So it's important to kind of decide. One of the foundational parts about this company was we wanted to decide what we were doing every day when we woke up, and who we got to work with, and those had to be good things. And so we have pivoted, and we have turned away from different opportunities that might have been extraordinarily profitable, but because we had control of our cap table, we were like, we would not enjoy that business. That just would be something we wouldn't want to be in. We wouldn't want to be working with that in that industry or with that kind of labor force, kind of mechanisms that would need to be in place, and that's okay. If you're an entrepreneur, you can make some of those decisions, and you can decide where you want to end up. And that's we haven't been the celebrated by the local deal flow community because we have been, outside of that deal flow.
Yeah.
And but that's okay because we're happy with where we are.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think needs to be also pointed out is you're also extremely intentional with the way that you have developed the culture within your business.
Yes.
And so you're GBA plus certified,
Yes.
right? You said that you were Indigenous certified. Is that
Certified Aboriginal business.
yeah,
yes.
okay.
Yeah.
And then also woman-led, right?
Yes.
And a huge percentage, was it 70% of your workforce is female?
Yes.
In what I would imagine is a very male-dominant industry. The tech industry is pretty
Yes.
highly male, right? And so very, very different than what a lot of the other businesses within this industry would be, or adjacent anyway, industry adjacent. So tell me about that and how important some of those things are. And if that was something that was right from the very beginning, or is this something that it just kind of evolved naturally within the community that was developing, or sorry, the culture that was developing in your company in the earlier days?
I think a bit of both.
Yeah.
So just because we had, the cap table was, 50-50,
Yeah.
in terms of gender. And I was the one who was probably out in the community versus the CTO more. I was engaging in women in tech and women in business and women entrepreneurship groups and
Yeah.
and speaking at the university and so I think that is really has kind of attracted this diverse talent because people see the way we are. They actually see the way we are in business and the leadership in our company.
Yeah.
We also made some choices right off the bat about being remote first. So to enable people who had kids that they were managing or households or hobbies and we recognize that a lot of women, especially coming out of the university, so there's a lot of international students here as well as couples who come and when they graduate and work, one will work with you, but then if the other gets an opportunity for a job elsewhere, then if there isn't the opportunity to work remotely, you lose your staff.
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of things that kind of evolved as kind of a part of our company and have become firmly fixed in what we do and how we hire. And a part of that also is growing organically.
Yeah.
So we get a lot of people coming to us. We don't have open postings.
Yeah.
So we get a lot of people coming to us because they've seen about us and heard about us, and we can take our time to hire the right candidates rather than saying we need to hire 50 people tomorrow because we got around.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a bit of a different evolution.
Yeah, and a huge advantage. I mean, right now, there's so many businesses out there that are really struggling to find human capital to bring people in to recruit. And so for you to say, we don't really post the jobs out there, people are coming to us, that's a remarkable statement on what you've created here.
Yes, we do post sometimes, but oftentimes we have a stack of resumes internally.
Yeah, that's really exciting. And so in terms of that, has that created just the way the culture is, that it's woman-led, that 70% of the staff are women, that you have this really, strong foundation in principle and everything. Is that something that is an advantage for you when you're out there trying to, generate business, when you're talking to governments, when you're talking to, big corporations about some of the things that you can provide to them? Does that get you into some places that it normally wouldn't, or are you finding that those doors are kind of closed because of it too, where you're not part of the boys club or the old establishment, I suppose?
It's an interesting dynamic, and that's really kind of complicated question. So there's a lot of now recognition of women being underrepresented in companies such as ours. Yeah. And so there's some special programs. So Women in Clean Tech is I'm a part of Accelerator out of Toronto, RBC and Mars Group. And so there's opportunities for these cohort groups and the trade commissioners put together some incredible missions for us and make industry connections. And then sometimes there's a certain limitation because it's almost like you're the shiny object group. Mm. And there's a separation from the fact that we all have, kick-ass companies. And it's kind of like, they're the women's group rather than they are the best companies that, are on the market and done so with the least amount of capital. I think there's always two sides.
Yep.
But we don't care. People say, what does it mean when you say, you're a certified Aboriginal business on a world stage? Yeah. And we said it means that we represent the art of the possible, and that we, it hasn't advantaged us in any way. Yeah. In fact, I would say, that it has positioned us as other in many circumstances and rooms. But it's important for us to say, because it's who we are, and it's important for people to understand that this is all possible. So you might as well wear it. And,
Yeah, because you're at the forefront of it, right? And so you're kind of blazing the trail for many more who are going to feel empowered to follow that, I think, right? And so, it's interesting. I was really curious about whether or not you're finding advantages or if it's actually creates more challenges. And so, because we're at this point where things are pivoting, I think, and the mindset is changing out there. And so it's exciting to see that change. I was hopeful that it was going to be very much advantageous, is what I was.
As a business and the products we deliver, it's massively advantageous.
Yeah.
So that part, absolutely. Once we get in those doors, that I think the questions that we can answer because of the diversity that we have on our team is the reason why we're highly valued.
Yeah. So I think in terms of just what you've created here, just to kind of recap, the growth, this organic growth that you've had, the way that you've been so intentional in the way that you've grown the business, I think is just really fascinating in this space. And so I hope that point isn't lost with our audience, because there's a lot of other businesses that we've interviewed, and there will be many more that we interview in this space that have a very different approach to it than what you guys have. And so it's just really refreshing to see that the steady growth. What would you call it? Success through slow.
Succeed slowly.
Succeed
rather
slowly.
Than fail fast.
Yeah. I think that's really great. Yeah. So any mistakes that you've made along the way that you want to share that really was one of these moments where you went, okay, there's a learning opportunity. Maybe I don't want to repeat that again, but just as kind of a last little bit of advice or information that somebody might be able to learn from.
Oh gosh, I think some of our biggest mistakes have been, our biggest opportunities.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't even call them, they're odd kind of mistakes, maybe where we stepped too far into a market, but we were welcomed in, so I always say it wasn't our fault, right? And the enormous pressure that put on us as a company to deliver into some of those really, we stepped out into thin air. One of them being with the Electric Power Research Institute, when they asked us to synthesize an energy grid and environment, and then they asked us to turn the lights out and say what happened to people in their homes when the power was off. And we're like, what? But that enabled then us to really dig deep into psychographics and demographics and work, just like crazy hard, 26 hours a day, to try and figure out how we were going to inform, how people were feeling and the risk and the economics and who was going to buy a generator. So that's those kinds of things are where I think some of the times when you step out just a little bit too far. That if you have the team around you that you can actually respond, then it's glorious.
It's really interesting, right? Because it pushes you kind of outside of the capacity and the knowledge place, but that's where the biggest growth will occur.
And it was an impossible question they asked us.
And
then it was, but we made it possible, which was then, I think why we're where we are. That's really great. Well, thank you. I really appreciate you sharing some of the backstory of RUNWITHIT Synthetics, as well as your backstory as an entrepreneur. I'm sure our audience would have learned a few things from that, and we'll be all cheering and rooting for you guys as you continue to grow and go into your first basically round of financing pretty soon, with those doubling and doubling and doubling. And so really big things to come. And so we'll have to follow up with you in a year's time or something like that, just to see where you're at, because the growth has been quite substantial the last couple of years, right? You've been doubling. Yes.
Right? Yeah, so exciting stuff.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. And there we have it. That's the wrap for this particular episode. But if you're interested in learning more about other entrepreneurs and their entrepreneurial journeys, head over to amplifyyourbusiness.ca, and that's where you'll find our archive, and all the future episodes will be there as well. And if you happen to be an entrepreneur with a great story, there's a form on that page that will allow you to basically submit a request to be on the show. And who knows, you might be our next guest. So thank you again, Myrna. Really
Thank you,
appreciate
Alex.
it. And good
Yeah.
luck with the future.
Thank you so much.